Welcome to the Airline Weekly Lounge. I'm your host, Edward Russell, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jay Shabat, to discuss Air France-KLM's move on SAS and United's third 100-plus airplane order in 2 years. Enjoy. Hey, Jay, how you doing this week?
I'm good, Ned. It was great to see you in New York last week at our SCIFT annual
That's right.
forum.
We had the Skiff Global Forum and the whole team decamped to New York when it was a good roster, lots of speakers. Last week, listeners, you enjoyed David Nealman's talk on stage at the forum, so it was a good time.
It was a good time, and I'm sure it's the same for you as well, Ned. But I got to meet some of our readers and listeners as well. So for some of you out there who got to meet us, that was great. Thanks for coming. And don't forget, we've got our aviation forum coming up on November 1st. So
That
hope to see more of you there.
that's right, and we'll drop a link to the aviation forum in the podcast info. But let's move on to the news. We're recording this on Wednesday, October 4th, and we've already had a news-packed week. Top of mind, though, for many people is the announcement that Air France-KLM will take a nearly 20% stake in SAS, and as part of that, SAS will switch alliances to SkyTeam from Star. Jay, what are your thoughts?
Consolidation is on the move in Europe for sure. We've already
Absolutely.
got, we've got don't forget the IAG Air Europa deal, which is subject to regulatory approval. We'll see where that goes. And
Yep.
then we've got Lufthansa buying into ITA. That's the successor of Alitalia. We've got Air Portugal up for sale. So there's a very eventful time in Europe on the consolidation front. Now, I was actually spent this morning going through some old Air France KLM transcripts for the past few quarters, and it is crystal clear that they want to consolidate. They want to be part of consolidation. There's a couple of quotes that I found that were pretty striking. One is Ben Smith, their CEO, saying that we don't want to get marginalized in Europe, and they, by the way, they also were very interested in Air Europa. They
They did
ultimately
some
said,
work with them, right? They worked with Air Europa for a few years. I mean, not recently, but
"Yep,
in the
yep,
past decade, yeah.
that's true." And then ultimately they said, "quote We couldn't find a deal satisfactory to us. We did take a close look, quote unquote, at ITA as well." And then with TAP Air Portugal, quote unquote, "We do find it a very interesting opportunity." So Air France is going to be, clearly heavily involved. And then to somewhat surprising, I don't know if it's a total shock, but they announced last week that, as you mentioned, Ned, they're going to be buying 20% of SAS, the
This
Scandinavian
week,
airline.
this week, it just happened Tuesday.
What did I say last week?
Yes, yes.
This week, yes, no, Tuesday. So they are going to get involved there. Now, interestingly, they said that after 2 years, they have some sort of option. It wasn't clear about exactly how this will all sort out. But after 2 years, they'll have some sort of opportunity to become the controlling shareholder in SAS.
Oh,
So, as a 20% shareholder, there's obviously limited flexibility on, what routes they go. That'll ultimately, SAS is still going to be in charge of making the
and I
big.
should say I listened to CEO Enko van der Werf and the chairman Carsten Dilling of SAS's press conference on Tuesday, and they were very clear that even under this current pact, which will involve them switching alliances, SAS will be in charge. There was a number of questions over, for example, whether their Eurobonus loyalty program would merge with Flying Blue, which is Air France KLM's program, and Van der Werf emphasized that no, this is a 20% stake. They will cooperate commercially and partner, but they will not. This isn't a merger, at least not yet.
Right. I liked his joke too. He said, if we do wind up merging the frequent flyer programs, at least it's flying blue, which is our colors, not flying red. It'd be more complicated.
That
It's
was a good one.
So jokes aside, this is a very serious move towards consolidating Europe's still very fragmented airline industry. Now, not having control. So it's interesting if you compare a consolidation in Europe and the US is very different. If you go back to, and I'm just citing one example here, but when United and Continental merged, they were able to ultimately close or at least significantly downsize the Cleveland hub, for example. And Delta did the same thing in Cincinnati after the Northwest merger.
Memphis.
And you can go on, American, US Airways used to have a Pittsburgh hub. So ideally, you probably would, if you were to think about a combination between Air France, KLM, and SAS, a hub like Stockholm is probably shouldn't be a hub. And ideally, you would want to de-hub that over time. Now, that gets difficult to do politically. And
I
then
was going to say
also,
that is a very political question. During the
right.
same press conference that we both listened to, the future location of SAS's headquarters came up several times. It's currently in Stockholm, but as local reporters pointed out, Sweden is not participating in the equity package. Denmark is. So a lot of questions over whether they'd move the hub to Copenhagen. And then there were even questions about the hub itself. And Chairman Dilling made an interesting point about, it was Vanderwerf who made an interesting point that, the most logical hub is the most southern point on our network, and that is Copenhagen.
Yep.
And he said they absolutely do focus on Stockholm, but he mentioned local traffic and much less talk about connections. So, yeah, like you said, I wonder, are Stockholm's days as a hub for SAS numbered?
Yeah, and Oslo for that matter. And yeah, we'll see how it all transpires. Now, if 2 years from now, Air France takes total control and they can get over the political obstacles, then, maybe you do see those secondary hubs at SAS slim down. But that is a big difference between Europe and the US. In the US, you have some political challenges. There's going to be local politicians in Cleveland that are going to scream and yell and whatever, but it does get more difficult when it's a sovereign country that's involved. So there's that. Now,
Absolutely.
what?
Jay,
Yeah,
one more thought on consolidation. I just want to point out that if Air France KLM does buy SAS, it only gives them a 9% share of the intra-European market. 9%, think about it. Consolidation in the US got United, American, and Delta up to about 20% each, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. But Air France KLM would still only have 9%. It's still quite a fragmented market.
it's still very much fragmented because part of the reason the LCCs are so big. I mean, Ryanair is the largest airline in Europe if you look at just the
Absolutely.
short haul markets. Now, if you look at if you the big difference between Europe and another big difference between the US and Europe is that the domestic market in the United States is so giant. And there are actually long haul domestic markets that make a lot of money. Think of, Los Angeles, New York, San Francisco, New York, even, New York to Florida is just this massive market. And, that's a pretty long market. Whereas Europe geographically is just very small. And all that short haul stuff is, they're 1 and 2 hour flights where, Air France doesn't make any money. None of the legacy carriers can make any money on that. I mean, this is SAS's big problem, right? Is that they don't have enough long flights where they're competitive. They're forced to compete on all of these short stage flights against Ryanair, against EasyJet, against Wizz Air. So the name of the game here is long haul, and in that market, it is more consolidated. I mean, still somewhat fragmented. You've got all these carriers like TUI with their vacation. You got Virgin Atlantic, which is part of the Air France ecosystem now, but it is somewhat fragmented still, but not quite as fragmented as the short haul market. And what SAS does is for Air France, I mean, they're certainly not interested in flights between Copenhagen and Berlin or whatever. I mean, that's not why Air France is
Right.
buying into this. What they're interested is basically pumping all that Scandinavian business traffic, which is a rather, that's serious market right there. It's
Yeah.
serious business, serious revenue. They want to pump that in to Paris and Amsterdam rather than, currently a lot of that goes because they're in StarTeam. A lot of that goes to Frankfurt, Lufthansa hubs. So now if they can shift that to their own hubs, they can put all of those Scandinavian business travelers on their flights to the Americas or their flights to Africa or their flights to wherever. So the logic is pretty clear there, and
Yeah.
that seems to make a lot of
Asterisk there,
sense.
Jay. Asterisk. I mean, it does make a lot of sense, but we also remember it looks like those flight cuts at Schiphol are going to come down starting next summer, which means KLM is going to have limited room to grow. This deal would also give the group another hub, like we talked about Copenhagen being probably the best hub in SAS's network. That could be very important to Air France KLM's future growth if they basically can't add flights in Amsterdam anymore.
100%. I think Air France KLM is nervous about that, what's happening in Amsterdam. So this does, if you recall, IAG, which owns British Airways, when they bought Aer Lingus, one of their justifications for that deal was that we couldn't grow in London Heathrow. And in fact, even if you go back to whenever it was 2011, 2012, I have my dates a little bit wrong, but when Iberia and British Airways themselves merged, one of the reasons why British Airways did it was because Madrid had this airport with so much growth opportunity. Uh, the infrastructure was there, whatnot, but Heathrow didn't have that. And this is somewhat the same. I mean, some differences, but I think Air France KLM is definitely worried about what you're talking about. How Amsterdam, there's not going to be any growth there. So much of the Scandinavian long haul connecting business traffic that we're referring to, you're right. It may most of it may wind up going through Paris rather than Amsterdam. But either way, Air France wants to collect on that, and it should be good revenue for them. Now, Air France,
It's still a big win for them, especially considering, SAS was in Star and while they weren't necessarily, Lufthansa didn't have a stake in them, they were long considered, sort of in Lufthansa's backyard. And so
yep.
it was a big strategic pivot for SAS, even as a standalone company, to align with Air France, KLM, and SkyTeam.
Now, conversely, Lufthansa pulled, I'm just going to call it Alitalia just for, but ITA out of the old habits never die. But they pulled quote unquote Alitalia out of Air France KLM's orbit and brought them into sort of the Star. They're, I guess, not technically part of StarTeam yet, but Star Alliance yet. But did I just say StarTeam? If
We're
they ever
forging
merge, there you
new
go.
global
Yeah.
alliances as we speak. The
if those
StarTeam
two
Alliance.
if those two alliances ever merge, there's a good name. You heard it from me first. No, but seriously, they pulled Alitalia into that orbit. And that was a situation interesting. Air France KLM actually did once own a quarter of the old Alitalia. And strategically, it was very fruitful in the sense that all of that northern Italian corporate traffic, very lucrative stuff, was getting funneled through Paris and Amsterdam. Very helpful. But in the end, Alitalia just lost so much money flying all those short haul routes, and they couldn't decide whether Rome or Milan was going to be their hub, and they were overstaffed for so many reasons. They were losing so much money that in the end, Air France came. It wasn't worth it. It was just the all the cost outweighed the benefits.
Right. And
Now
remember, Air
that's
France KLM was a partner to Certare's failed bid to take ITA private last year that they just weren't that. But at the time, Air France KLM was not able to provide any equity because of the conditions to the French state aid that they received. So that bid ultimately failed, allowing Lufthansa to succeed in their bid for ITA.
exactly. So Air France, they would have liked to get back involved with Alitalia's successor because of that Italian business traffic that I mentioned. They would have loved to have done that on their own terms, where Alitalia or ITA was restructured and wouldn't have all those losses of the past. So now what they're hoping is that they were able to negotiate a similar deal with SAS, or a deal with SAS where they can get the benefits of the connecting traffic, the connecting feed, without having SAS losses. And let's be clear, it is not a very profitable airline, without having that outweigh those benefits. And that'll be the big challenge. Air France KLM says, our goal going forward is that we want to have a 7 to 8% operating margin every year, which is not, that's not super ambitious. But they said we're not doing any deal that puts that goal in jeopardy. So if we think, we're not just going to grab some, heavily loss making airline. Now, just for the connecting fee, they obviously feel in this case that SAS has done sufficient restructuring, which is something that you can do to a great degree when you're in bankruptcy. It's
Right.
easier to cut costs. So they obviously feel that SAS is in a better position to make decent money, or at least not lose a lot of money. So
Yes.
they're going for it. And we'll see if they wind up taking full control 2 years from now.
Yeah, that's good. Everyone's gonna be watching. So it's an interesting story. And the one final thought on this before we take a break is just, where does this leave TAP Air Portugal? Air France KLM has expressed a lot of interest in them, as has IAG and Lufthansa, but with each major group now involved in a consolidation deal, I'm just curious how much capacity each one will have to bid on TAP. And it's maybe they have the capacity and my concerns are completely unfounded, but two mergers at a time or two acquisitions at a time is a lot for an airline. But we shall see
Yeah,
as bids come in.
right. And the fact that they're only buying 20% SAS, I think that limits the capital intensity of this. I think Air France probably will have it in there. I mean, perhaps they can do a partner again to buy something like TAP Air Portugal. And that TAP, by the way, is the next big battleground. Because if you look at, I was looking at Cirium DO numbers this morning on all the airlines in Europe. If you look at, so Europe has the five big, we'll call them low cost carriers: Ryanair, EasyJet, Wizz Air, Jet2, which is bigger than some might think, and Norwegian. So let's exclude those for a moment. The only independent airlines really left in Europe of any kind of significant size. So you have TAP Air Portugal's number one, which is why there's so much in focus now. Finnair is actually number two. Now, I always thought that Finnair might have made a good uh, acquisition target for an IAG, but give them more Asia exposure. Now with all this stuff that's happening in Russia, Russia overflight, Finnair depends on Russian airspace. A lot they did, so that makes Finnair kind of less attractive. They're probably off the radar screen for now. Then you start getting into Volatea, and TUI's kind of its own thing. Lot Polish, does anybody really want that? Possibly. Lot Polish kind of wild card. You got to think about it, because that's Poland's actually a pretty big market. They're planning on building a new airport in Warsaw, and who knows, but I don't think that's anything we'll hear about any real soon. But then after that, you start getting to like really small airlines, Air Baltics of the world. There's Iceland Air. It's interesting. Flybees and Play, very, very small players. So we're kind of getting to the point where Europe is, we may be towards the end of the consolidation game.
We may be. We shall find out
Maybe.
soon. With
Soon
that, we
enough.
will take a quick break and we're going to come back and talk about the other big news story of the week so far. And we're back. Jay, so on Tuesday as well, United Airlines unveiled yet another triple digit order for 110 Airbus and Boeing aircraft. Now, these were options and purchase rights that the airline exercised, but it comes after they've already had ordered more than 300 planes in 2021 and 2022. So that's a lot of planes on order. Thoughts?
Yeah, that is. I agree. That's a lot of planes on order. They're really getting aggressive here. They clearly feel that their route network is operating under its full potential. That there's a lot more they can squeeze out of that. Now, one big strategy they have, aside from just mere growth, is overall growth is growth in actual shell size, where they want to go to bigger average aircraft. And that you can see the logic there. Bigger aircraft tend to have lower unit cost, and you make better use of scarce slots at an airport like Newark, for example, which you really can't grow too much in terms of flight frequencies. So they actually, in fact, in the press release they issued, relating to the new aircraft order. They said that in 2019, United averaged 104 seats per North American flight departure, and they noted that that's among the lowest in the industry. But by 2027, United expects that number to jump more than 40% to over 145 seats. Now, some of the math there just figures it because they're retiring a lot of regional aircraft, really small, 50 seaters and stuff, 70 seaters. So that's one reason why the average aircraft size is going up. But they're also moving to, just these A321 Neos, which are very large. It's the largest.
200 seats in their
Yeah.
standard domestic configuration.
Yep. And then, even on the max side, those are pretty large. So there you go. United is they believe they can they're they believe they've got a lot of growth there, but that's a lot of seats that they're going to have to fill over time.
It is, and the upgauging concept has been around for years. I mean, the US, and we saw Delta really begin to upgauge 2013, 2014. I remember when they did their deal to retire 50 seaters and buy 717s. So this is not a new strategy for United, and it makes a lot of sense, not questioning the upgauging strategy. What is questionable is just how many planes they have in order. So I looked at United's total sort of capital aircraft commitments at the end of June. This is the latest numbers they have. And they had 49.3 billion in capital commitments. That is massive. Comparison, Delta only had 18.5 billion and American 12.7 billion.
Yeah.
Now, the asterisk there is both Delta and American, as you pointed out, have already upgauged more of their fleet. They're further along with their fleet renewal, so they don't need to buy as many planes. But United has a lot of commitments, and that really makes you wonder, how they're going to pay for all these planes that are going to come over the next decade.
At a time of rising interest rates, yeah, it does definitely elicit some question marks about
right. And
yeah,
analysts have asked United about this, and I look back at several recent transcripts, and United has basically said they think they're going to have the free cash flow to cover their capital expenditures, and which, coupled with debt, secured enhanced equipment trust certificate or WTC notes, can pay for a lot of those. So United is confident, but we really, like you said, interest rates are up, debt's more costly. The day of getting sub 3% on a WCA tranche is probably gone for the foreseeable future. Never say it won't come back, but yeah. And then there's just the question of do US airlines have too many planes on order? We're already seeing weakness in the low end of the domestic market, as we've seen Breeze, Frontier, JetBlue all point out there's softness there. And international is rebounding this year and expected to next year, but it's not going to continue to surge. It's going to eventually stabilize. So you really have to wonder if having sorry, I did the number 767 planes on firm order based on end of June numbers is
which I think is more than any other airline in the world, except for maybe the India, I don't know, Indigo and Air India. Maybe.
Oh yeah, I think Indigo has some huge number of Airbus A320neos on order, but you really have to wonder if that's Indigo is in an emerging market. India is a growing market. The US is a mature market, and its rate of growth, pandemic aside, is gonna ultimately come down to roughly economic growth. So 2-3% a year. That's a ton of aircraft. Even if you're replacing, and most of those are for replacement, that's still a ton of new aircraft coming to United over the next decade. And raises questions.
It does raise questions. They're replacing small aircraft, bigger aircraft. So yeah, that's I think there are question marks there. I mean, yes, I see the logic that they can get more out of a hub like Newark if they're flying bigger planes, smaller planes. I see the logic in buying these A321neos, which have great economics.
And you're going from 757s with about 175 seats to A321neos with 200 seats. So clear, gauge gains.
Yeah, and you might not have to fill every single one of those seats. That to a certain degree, you're getting free seats because the economics are so good.
Yes,
if you have 100% load factor on a 757, might be just as profitable as a 90% load factor. I'm just making that number up, a 90% load factor on A321neo. So you might be willing to stomach some empty seats. So keep that in mind. But still, It's a lot of empty seats to fill. A lot of new seats to fill. One other point I just wanted to make on the international side, United's really bullish on international, clearly, with these 787 orders. Now, it is kind of the opposite in terms of the gauging situation, because if you think about, in the past, United flew larger 777s. They're totally not interested in and they haven't bought maybe one day, but I don't think they really want to buy that new 777, the nines that are the 8s and 9s that Boeing is now trying to build. I almost said build, but trying to build. But they are buying a lot of 787s, which is a smaller aircraft. So in a sense, there's somewhat, you might say, down gauging on the international front. Now they believe that during COVID, a lot of foreign adversaries, and if you think about, I don't know, the Norwegians of the world, or even some of the bigger European players in Asia, for example, a lot of them either cut flights, some of them went bankrupt, some of them went out of business, some of them moved to much smaller aircraft, 380s, a lot of them were parked. So they just think that the international opportunities, there's still growth there, and they have a good opportunity to seize a lot of that, because their foreign rivals won't be able to on the capacity front. And that's another question about whether or not they're right. But it's an ambitious strategy, and it's you see the logic, but there's risk.
Yeah, exactly. I everything you said. I want to point out that if they end up taking, so the order was for 787-9s, as we well know, the actual variant that United takes is probably going to change between now and 2028. But I want to point out the 787-10, which doesn't quite have the range as the 9, but it's still a very, very efficient plane. It seats about as many passengers as United currently puts on their 777-200s. And the 777-200s are going to be getting up there for replacement later this decade. I mean, some of them are already very old. So you got to think that they could be eyeing some 777 replacement there with some 787-10. So
good point about comparing the capacity of those two aircraft. And remember that United they were very late in getting the 300 ERs, if I remember. They don't have too many of them. Is that correct, Ned?
They have 20 of them, and they're all really young. The first one arrived in 2016.
Yeah, so there you go. Yeah. They were not one of these airlines like, Air France, which has a ton of 300 ERs. The majority of United's 777s are very old. So a lot of these 787s that they're ordering are going to be replacement aircraft. So again, that mitigates the risk somewhat. They're not, don't think of all of these 800 planes or however many they're ordering in total. Don't think of these as all growth, but there's definitely some growth built in.
Yes,
pretty not a negligible amount of growth.
Absolutely. Well, Jay, with that, we're going to say goodbye for this week. Listeners, you can reach myself at er@skift.com. You can reach Jay at js@skift.com. Jay, always a pleasure.
Yep, it was always a pleasure, and always in another exciting week in the airline industry. I'm sure we'll have a lot more excitement as the quarterly earnings season begins in just another couple next week, right? The 12th. I think Delta goes on October 12th.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode of the Airline Weekly Lounge podcast. Check out airlineweekly.com for a new issue every Monday and updates on the latest airline news throughout the week.